what can we do now that we are about to assume political power? And the answer is a lot. You see, the Democrats, they specialized in this. The Democrats would use the Department of Justice. They would use their instruments of government to come into red states and to red cities and try to make them in their mold. What we're talking about, though, is very simple stuff. So, for example, the Department of Justice needs to launch criminal investigations into every gender-affirming care clinic, every child castration clinic across the country, every single one. We need to look into Lurie Children's in Chicago. We need to look into Boston Children's Hospital. We need to look into the Mayo Clinic. And these need to be criminal investigations. In fact, we need a gender-affirming care czar. There was a doctor in Florida doing viral TikTok videos about mutilating girls. That doctor should be arrested for some federal law, and I'm sure there's something there. Instead of all these FBI agents going after Latin mass, why don't the Kash Patel, working with Pam Bondi, and the FBI after, I'm just talking about the youth. I'm not talking about if they're castrating a 28-year-old, that's a separate moral issue. I don't like it, but that's a separate moral issue. I'm talking about 13-year-olds. I'm talking about 12-year-olds. I'm talking about 11-year-olds that are getting drugs. They're getting psychological. They're being psychologically manipulated by the system. But understand that now that we control the instruments of the federal government, we are able to then use the federal government, we being our movement, say like Daniel Penny. If Daniel Penny gets convicted, we're just not going to send any money for New York transportation, or that's what we should do. You see, the options in front of us are significant. And so when it comes to this gender castration thing, there's many ways to look at it. Number one, you have to look into the advertising of it. Have the Federal Trade Commission go in and say, were you guys fraudulently advertising the service? Number two, look into who's making all this money. Don't just go after the gender-affirming cares. You need to go after Pfizer and AstraZeneca, Moderna, who are making the Lupron that are being prescribed to 12-year-olds. Go after the pharmaceutical companies that are making the drugs that are going after 12-year-olds. You need to make it so toxic to castrate kids in this country that it is no different than the tobacco industry. No one wants to touch it. I don't want it. Too many lawsuits, too much going on. Then the federal government needs to join with all the other states and start suing on the civil side. And the plaintiffs as well. How powerful would it be if the Solicitor General of the United States, the Department of Justice, joins some of these plaintiff lawsuits of these 12 and 13 and 14 and 15-year-olds or these 20-year-olds that are detransitioners that are suing these doctors because they cannot reach sexual climax and they've been completely cut off and they regret it. And the doctors say, too bad, so sad, buyer beware. You're 20 years old. I lied to you when you're 13. These doctors need to go to prison. Class action lawsuits, squeeze them criminally. And I guarantee you, in fact, Dr. Ethan Heim, who I think is under federal indictment right now for the whistleblower at the Houston Children's Hospital, which I hope that we can get that indictment lifted and fixed with Pam Bondi. Dr. Ethan Heim blew the whistle that there was illegal activity happening in Houston. Follow the whistleblower. We need a whole division of DOJ lawyers that are just obsessed with this. This has got to end. It will not be put up in Sacramento. This is not like, we're going to leave it to California, and we're going to leave it to New York if you want to castrate kids. No, this is a non-negotiable, okay? I'm going to put up with this. There's no place in civil society. This is not even allowed anymore in Europe. They don't allow it in the UK. They don't allow it in Denmark. They don't allow it in any of these other countries. There is no scientific basis for this. This is voodoo, hocus pocus, made up, fake, fabricated, no different than witch doctor stuff. It's not an exaggeration. There is no basis for this. There's no scientific data, no literature. All the literature they're based on is completely fraudulent. They're like, it's an identity. Well, then if it's an identity, how can people detransition from it? If it's an identity, how can you be a man one day and a woman another day? If we cannot protect our children, what is the point in being? And so we need to make sure that this story never happens again, where dads lose their sons because the wife wants to transition their kid because obviously they're psychologically deranged. We're not going to put up with this. Or where teachers are grooming these kids. The child mutilation issue is one of the morally defining issues of our time. End the cult. And we're going to squeeze it every way we can. We're going to try to squeeze it financially, squeeze it legally. We need perp walks of all these doctors that have gone, put these kids under the knife and chopped off their breasts. Federal prison. You abused a child. We're going to put an end to the cult.